The Alpha King banished his Luna for betrayal, then learned she had saved his kingdom in secret. The throne room went silent, the way a room goes silent right before something breaks. King Ronan stood at the top of the stone steps. His crown sat crooked on his head, though he did not notice. His jaw was set hard, like something carved from cold stone. Below him, on the marble floor, his wife Elara knelt. She was not begging. She knelt the way a person kneels when they have already made peace with what is coming. "Explain the gold," Ronan said. His voice echoed off the high walls. She said nothing. That silence hurt him more than anything else could have. Not the missing gold from the treasury, not the sealed letters carrying the wolf symbol of their enemy, the Vaskar pack. Not the whispers running through the halls that his own wife, his Luna, had been secretly meeting with the enemy leader under the light of a new moon. It was her silence that broke something inside him. If a stranger had refused to answer him, he might have forgiven that. But from her, from the woman who shared his bed and his throne, the silence felt like a confession. "Say something," he said, his voice cracking just slightly. She lifted her eyes to meet his. She looked at him the way someone looks at a house that has already burned to the ground. There was nothing left to save. "Would it matter?" she asked quietly. It would not. He had already made his decision 3 nights ago, after staring for hours at the ledgers his second-in-command had pushed under his door. Those nights had been sleepless. He had paced his chambers, unable to believe what the numbers showed, unable to accept that the woman he loved might have betrayed everything they had built together. "Elara Voss," he said, and his voice changed. It stopped sounding like a husband and started sounding like a king delivering a sentence. "You are banished from the Blackthorn pack, effective when this moon sets tonight." Behind him, his mother let out a sound like something tearing apart. No one else in the room dared to speak. Elara rose to her feet. She did not argue. She did not cry, though somehow her calm was worse than tears would have been. Slowly, she reached up and unclasped the moonstone pendant resting against her throat. It was the same pendant Ronan had given her the night he had claimed her as his mate, 4 years earlier. She had never once taken it off, not for bathing, not for sleeping, not even during her illness the winter before last. She set it down gently on the marble step in front of her. The gesture was small, but it was final, and everyone in the room understood it as such. "You will regret asking me to leave," she said, "before you ever understand why I truly left in the first place." Ronan did not know what she meant by those words. He would remember them for a long time, turning them over in his mind again and again, but on that night, standing on his throne with his crown crooked and his heart pounding, he did not understand them at all. She was gone before the moon fully set. There was no farewell scene, no crowd gathered to watch her go, no member of the pack brave enough to walk with her to the border and see her off properly. Ronan told himself that the quiet settling over the pack house afterward was relief. He told himself this while lying awake that night, and the next, and the one after that. It was not relief. It sat on his chest like a heavy stone that refused to move, no matter how he tried to breathe around it. 6 weeks passed. Then the Vaskar pack launched a surprise attack on the eastern farmlands, the very same lands mentioned in those sealed letters that had convinced Ronan of his wife's betrayal. But when Blackthorn's warriors arrived to defend the territory, they found the enemy already defeated. Not simply pushed back, but completely and humiliatingly routed, as though they had marched straight into a trap that someone had built for them long before the battle ever began. Ronan's second-in-command, a steady man named Corin, discovered the first piece of the truth almost by accident. While searching the border area for survivors and information, his men found a burned-out cottage. In its cellar, hidden beneath loose floorboards, they discovered a collection of ledgers. These were not the ledgers Ronan had seen before his wife's banishment. These were different books entirely, filled with careful records tracking gold moving out of the Blackthorn treasury and into the hands of 3 separate informants who had been secretly working inside the Vaskar pack's ranks. When Corin brought these ledgers to Ronan, his expression was the look of a man who has just realized which grave he has been dancing upon without knowing it. "She wasn't stealing from us," Corin said, his voice low and careful. "She was buying us information. For over a year, maybe longer than that." Ronan said nothing at first. He simply took the ledgers from Corin's hands and began to read. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was hers, with that particular slant on her letter E that she used to tease him about, joking that it made her signature look like it was falling over sideways. He kept reading, the sealed letters bearing the Vaskar wolf symbol, the ones he had believed were love letters exchanged with the enemy Alpha, were nothing of the sort. They were coded messages. What looked like ordinary talk of grain shipments and trade routes was actually a disguise for troop counts and military movements. His wife had been running a secret intelligence operation from inside enemy correspondence, entirely on her own, for well over a year. And she had let her own husband believe she was a traitor, rather than risk exposing the details of her operation, details that could have gotten her informants killed if word ever slipped out. Ronan sat down on the floor of his study, his legs suddenly unable to hold his weight any longer. "Why didn't she tell me?" he said, though there was no one else in the room to hear him. Corin, who had always respected Elara more than he would ever have admitted to his king's face while she still lived among them, answered anyway. "Would you have let her do it?" Ronan did not need to think long about his answer. No, he would not have allowed it. He would have surrounded her with guards, locked every gate in the kingdom, and in doing so, he would have lost the war more slowly, but just as certainly, because Vaskar's spies would have known exactly where his attention was focused. She had understood that about him. She had understood his own nature better than he understood it himself. He spent the following days going through every piece of evidence Corin's men could gather, letters from informants confirming payments received, notes in Elara's handwriting detailing troop movements weeks before Blackthorn's scouts had even confirmed them, a map, hidden inside a hollow book on the shelf of her old study, marking every safe house she had used to pass information along the border. The more he read, the more he understood the size of what she had done. She had not simply passed along a few useful rumors. She had built an entire secret network, run it in complete isolation, and protected her own kingdom from a war that could have destroyed it, all while allowing everyone she loved to believe the worst about her. Ronan called his mother to his study one evening, unable to carry the weight of what he now knew by himself any longer. His mother read through the ledgers slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she turned each page. When she finished, she looked up at her son with an expression he had never seen on her face before, something between grief and disbelief. "She never said a word," his mother whispered. "Not one word, even when I visited her the night before the banishment and begged her to defend herself." "You visited her?" Ronan asked, surprised. "I did. I told her that if she simply explained herself, you would understand. She told me that some kinds of trust could not be explained. They had to be given freely, or they meant nothing at all." His mother set the ledgers down gently on the desk. "I did not understand what she meant then. I believe I understand it now." Ronan sat with that thought for a long while after his mother left the room. He thought about every moment in the last year when Elara had seemed distracted, tired, distant. He had assumed she was growing bored of her life at his side. He had assumed many things, and every single one of them had been wrong. He gave the order to find her. It took his search party 11 days. They finally located her in a small border town. So small, it barely had a name worth remembering on any map. She was working there as a healer, treating the sick and injured under a name that was not her own. When Ronan finally found the small clinic where she worked, and stepped through the doorway, she looked up from bandaging a child's arm and went completely still, the way a person goes still when deciding, in that very instant, whether to run. She did not run. Ronan noticed things about her that had not been there 4 years ago. A burn scar starting at her wrist, the skin still slightly raised and pink. A way she flinched, just barely, whenever someone in the clinic raised their voice too loudly. These were new. These told their own quiet story of the years she had spent doing this dangerous work alone, without protection, without anyone to turn to if something went wrong. "You could have told me," Ronan said finally, once the child had been sent away, and the two of them stood alone in the small room. "You could have trusted me without needing to be told," she answered. The words landed exactly the way she meant them to. He did not have a response ready, not one that did not taste bitter in his own mouth, as he thought of everything he had believed about her, without ever once asking her directly for the truth. He reached into his coat and pulled out the moonstone pendant. He had carried it with him through 11 days of travel and 3 different towns, turning it over in his pocket more times than he could count, trying to think of the right words to say when he finally found her. None of the words he had rehearsed felt like enough now that he was standing in front of her. She looked at the pendant resting in his open palm, as though it were a question she had not yet decided how to answer. "I built you a kingdom in the dark," she said quietly, "while you built me a courtroom in the light." Ronan said nothing for a long moment. There was nothing he could say that would undo the banishment, the public shame, the year she had spent alone doing work that should have earned her the highest honor in their kingdom instead of exile. Finally, he spoke the only true thing he had. "I know," he said, "not an apology, not an excuse, just the plain and heavy truth of it, offered the way a person hands back something precious they had been trusted to carry safely and had nearly dropped." She did not take the pendant from his hand right away. But she did not turn away from him either, and for the first time in 11 long days of searching, Ronan allowed himself to hope that perhaps this was not an ending after all, but the beginning of something they might still be able to rebuild, one honest conversation at a time. Word by word, over the following weeks, they began to talk. Really talk, in a way they had not done in longer than either of them wanted to admit. She told him about the informants she had recruited, the risks she had taken, the nights she had lain awake wondering if her secrecy was worth the cost of his trust. He told her about the sleepless nights after her banishment, the moment he first read her handwriting in those hidden ledgers, the shame that had settled into his bones once he understood what he had done. When she finally returned to Blackthorn, she did not return quietly. Ronan called the entire pack together in the same throne room where he had once cast her out. In front of every member of his kingdom, he told the full truth of what she had done, the sacrifices she had made, and the injustice of her banishment. He placed the moonstone pendant back around her neck himself, his hands steady this time, and the kingdom that had once watched her leave in silence now watched her return, with the honor she had always deserved. Elara Voss had saved her kingdom in secret, asking for nothing in return but the trust she had once been denied. In the end, she received far more than that. She received a king who had finally learned the difference between ruling with fear and loving with faith, and a home that would never again mistake her silence for guilt.